They say every story begins somewhere, but hers began long before she could understand anything at all. Before she could speak. Before she even knew what freedom meant. Her world started with a cry. Soft, small, almost apologetic. As if even her first breath knew she had entered a life where noise was not welcome. The morning she was born, the sky over England was pale and quiet. A thin layer of fog wrapped the countryside like a blanket, and the grand house she entered looked more like a museum than a home. Everything polished, everything controlled, everything arranged so perfectly that even a misplaced spoon looked like rebellion. People whispered the same phrase again and again, "She will be a lady." Not "she will be happy," not "she will be strong," just "a lady." And that single word carried the weight of her entire future. As she grew, the house became her universe. Long hallways that echoed with footsteps she wasn't supposed to make. Windows taller than her dreams. Rooms she wasn't allowed to enter. People she couldn't speak to and thus spoken to first. She was a little girl, but she was never allowed to behave like one. Her mother would often lean down, adjusting the ribbon in her hair, whispering, "Remember, darling, always Grace." The girl didn't understand what grace meant, but she understood that running, laughing, shouting, climbing, all the things her heart naturally wanted, were not part of it. She learned early that the world expected her to be small. Small in voice, small in movement, small in presence. But inside, she wasn't small at all. She had a wildness she didn't know what to do with. A spark that flickered quietly when no one was watching. Most days, though, someone was watching. Her governess arrived when she was barely 6. A calm-faced woman with steady eyes and a voice that never rose above a gentle firmness. The girl wasn't afraid of her, but she sensed something serious about her. Something that said, childhood is over. The lessons began the next morning. Not reading, not writing, not music. Posture. How to sit without sinking into the chair. Back straight, but not stiff. Hands folded, but not clenched. Feet together, but not tense. Chin slightly lowered, but never too low, because modesty was elegant, but insecurity was unattractive. Tiny details that felt like puzzles she had to solve with her body. When she slouched even a little, the governess tapped the wooden floor with a small stick. Not hard, just enough to say, "That is not how a lady sits." The sound became a rhythm in her life. Tap, fix your shoulders. Tap, lift your chin. Tap, don't swing your legs. Tap, sit still. Sometimes, her back felt like it was made of stone. Sometimes, she wanted to cry. But crying wasn't allowed either. Crying is noise, the governess would say gently, and noise does not suit a lady. So she learned to swallow emotions the way others swallowed tea, quietly, delicately, almost invisibly. Walking lessons came next. Not walking, floating. Steps so soft they barely touched the ground. A pace slow enough to seem elegant, but fast enough never to attract attention. Your feet must not announce your arrival, the governess said. A true lady enters a room like a breeze. The girl tried, again and again. Sometimes she got it right. Sometimes her heel clicked too loudly. She hated that sound. That one loud click felt like failure, like she had broken a rule she never agreed to in the first place. Speaking was the hardest lesson of all. Not because she talked too much, but because she was expected to talk almost not at all. Soft voice, the governess would remind her. Soft, softer, softer still. Her natural voice was warm, curious, full of life. But the voice she was trained into was barely more than a whisper. A lady speaks only when needed, her mother said at dinner one evening. Too much talking makes a girl seem unrefined. The girl looked down at her plate, pushing vegetables around with her fork. She had questions in her head, so many questions, but she kept them locked inside, because questions were noise too. One day, she gathered the courage to ask the governess something, very softly, very carefully. "Why must I be so quiet?" The governess paused. For the first time, her expression wasn't firm. It wasn't distant. It was human. "My dear," she said after a long breath, "in this world, silence is dignity." The girl didn't fully understand. but she felt the weight of those words, like a cloak around her small shoulders. Silence is dignity. It sounded beautiful and heartbreaking, all at once. She walked away thinking, if silence makes me dignified, why does it also make me feel invisible? She never said that part out loud. Her days blended together. Lessons, practice, correcting mistakes she didn't even realize she was making. If she laughed too loudly, a disapproving glance corrected her. If she moved too quickly, a raised eyebrow reminded her. If she showed frustration, a quiet, "Ladies do not frown," stopped her. Slowly she learned to hide pieces of herself. Little by little. The loud parts first, then the curious parts, then the honest parts. And by the time she was 10, she had mastered the art of being watched. She knew how to stand in a room full of adults and take up almost no space at all. She knew how to blend into the background so seamlessly that no one questioned her presence or noticed her absence. Sometimes she wondered, is this what being a lady means? To disappear so gracefully that people mistake it for elegance? No one answered. No one even knew she was asking. One afternoon, something small happened. Something she would remember for years. She dropped a book. A simple accident. But the sound echoed through the quiet room like a thunderclap. The governess turned sharply. What happened? The girl froze. I dropped it. I'm sorry. Her voice trembled. Just a little. Just enough. The governess sighed, but not angrily. More like someone watching a flower bend in the wrong direction. You must not tremble when you speak, she said softly. Strength must sit beneath your voice. Calm, even when you feel none. The girl nodded, though her hands still shook. Let's try again, the governess said, kneeling to her level. Say it once more, but this time, say it as if the world is not allowed to shake you. The girl took a breath. I dropped it, she whispered, her voice steadier this time. The governess smiled faintly. That is how a lady speaks. But as the girl picked up the book, she wondered silently, if I must hide every feeling I have, will I ever know which ones are real? She didn't know the answer, and no one was going to give her one. As the years passed, she learned something quietly, almost without realizing it. The house didn't just teach her rules. It shaped her, pressed her into a mold she never agreed to, yet somehow fit into, because she had no other choice. Her mornings began before the sun fully rose. The corridors were always cold at that hour, and as she walked, her small footsteps made no sound. Not because the carpet was soft, but because she had learned to move like a shadow, to exist without disturbing anything. Her governess waited for her in the sitting room, always with the same poised posture, always with the same calm eyes that missed nothing. They started each day with walking, not walking to go anywhere, walking simply to practice how. Slow steps, measured, balanced. A lady's walk had to be like poetry, soft at the edges, controlled in the middle. Sometimes her mind wandered during these lessons. Sometimes she imagined running barefoot outside, through the tall grass behind the estate, feeling the earth under her feet, the wind in her hair, freedom in her lungs. But daydreams were dangerous things. The governess noticed the flicker in her eyes and tapped the air with that familiar wooden stick. A warning. Stay present, she said. Ladies do not drift away. The girl lowered her gaze, forcing her thoughts back into the narrow hallway where dreams had no room to stretch. During meals, she sat with her family, but she didn't feel like she was part of them. Their voices floated above her, talking about things she didn't understand. Politics, business, invitations, reputation, reputation, reputation. She heard that word so much that sometimes it echoed in her sleep. Reputation. It felt like a ghost that lived in the house with them. A ghost that watched her closer than anyone else. A ghost that would haunt her if she made one wrong move. Her father barely spoke to her directly. He was not unkind, just distant. He spoke to her as if she were already grown, already trained, already responsible for the family's honor. Your behavior reflects on us, he said once. You must remember that every day. She didn't fully understand what an entire family's honor meant. She was only a child. But she nodded anyway, because children didn't challenge fathers in her world. Sometimes she saw neighborhood children running down the road laughing, messy, wild. She watched through the tall windows, the kind that made her feel like she was always behind glass, separate from the world. Once, just once, she asked her mother, "Why can they run outside and I can't?" Her mother smiled softly, stroking her hair with a kind but distant touch. "Because you are different, my darling. You were born to be a lady, and ladies must be careful with how they present themselves." Present themselves. The phrase confused her for years. Was she something to present? Like a painting? A flower arrangement? A symbol? Not a person? She didn't ask again. She learned something important that day. Questions had consequences. Less she asked, the smoother life felt. The quieter she became, the less the world pushed back. Still, there were nights when she lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, wishing she could say things out loud, wishing she could cry without needing to hide her face in the pillow, wishing she could laugh the way she did when she was very small, before the rules wrapped themselves around her life like invisible threads. The strangest part was, the governess saw everything. Not just the posture, not just the voice, but the ache she tried to hide. One evening as they practiced reading together, the girl's voice cracked, barely. Just a tiny break, but enough to betray the storm she kept inside. The governess paused. She didn't scold her, she didn't correct her. She simply looked at her, longer than usual. "Are you tired?" she asked quietly. The girl opened her mouth to say no, the answer she always gave, but something in the governess's eyes stopped her. She nodded, very small, very quietly. The governess set the book down and folded her hands. It wasn't a warm gesture, not motherly, but it was gentle. "You carry more than a child should," she said softly, "but you carry it well." It was the closest thing to comfort the girl had ever received. But even comfort in her world came with conditions. The next morning, the lessons continued as usual. No break, no softening, just rules layered over rules. Because softness was a luxury the world didn't allow her. As she approached her early teenage years, her life changed in small but heavy ways. People started watching her differently, not as a child, but as a future woman. At gatherings, adults observed her posture, commented on her politeness, whispered judgments under their breath. "She has the right manners, she knows how to hold herself, she will make a fine wife one day." She heard these comments even when they pretended she couldn't. And each time, a quiet fear bloomed in her chest, because she understood something new. Her entire childhood wasn't preparing her to be herself. It was preparing her to be chosen. Chosen by a family, chosen by a husband, chosen by society. She existed to fit into a future shaped long before she was born. Sometimes she wondered who she would be if she were allowed to choose, what she would like, what she would hate, what she would dream of. But those thoughts were dangerous too. So she learned to silence them like she silenced everything else. One winter evening, while she practiced her handwriting by the fire, the governess said something unexpected. "You are becoming a fine young lady," she said. The girl looked up, her quill frozen mid-stroke. The governess rarely gave compliments. This one felt strange, almost unreal. "You've learned to control your voice," the governess continued. "Control your movements, control your emotions. Few girls your age manage that." Stared at the paper, at the neat letters that looked nothing like her real thoughts. A question rose in her chest, quiet but powerful. "If I control everything, will there be anything left of me?" She didn't say it. Of course she didn't. But the governess watched her for a moment longer, as if she had heard the thought anyway. Then she said the sentence the girl would remember for the rest of her life. "Being a lady is not about being yourself. It is about being what the world needs you to be." The fire crackled softly in the silence that followed. The girl felt something shift inside her, not breaking, not collapsing, just shifting, as if her heart moved a little further from who she might have been. From that night on, she stopped resisting the rules, even in her imagination. Not because she agreed with them, not because she believed in them, but because resistance felt pointless, tiring, endless. She learned to move gracefully even when she felt shaky. She learned to speak softly even when she wanted to scream. She learned to smile politely even when she felt like disappearing. And slowly, the world praised her for it. She's so composed, so elegant, so mature, so ladylike. No one noticed the quiet ache behind her eyes. No one noticed the dreams she buried. No one noticed the girl she no longer remembered, because that was the point of her training, not to help her become someone extraordinary, but to help her blend so perfectly that her suffering never disturbed the room. By the time she reached 15, she had mastered the art of silence so well that even her footsteps felt polite. People saw her and said, "She is everything a Regency lady should be." But if you looked closer, if you stood in that hallway with her on a cold morning at dawn and watched the way she held her breath before opening any door, you would know the truth. She wasn't born a lady. She was made into one. Shaped, pressed, softened, controlled. And the most tragic part? She believed that was the only way to be loved. You never really notice how clothing controls a person until you step into a world where every thread, every color, every fold of fabric silently tells you who you are allowed to be. And that was the Regency world. A world where a woman didn't just wear her clothes. Her clothes defined her, shaped her, judged her, and sometimes imprisoned her in expectations she never agreed to. Let me take you there, slowly, gently, like morning light sliding across a quiet English estate. You wake up in a cold, sunlit bedroom. The windows are tall, the curtains sheer, the world outside still wrapped in dawn mist. And someone knocks softly. "Miss, it's time to dress." This isn't an invitation. This is duty. Because a Regency lady's day didn't begin with breakfast. It began with clothes. Her first outfit wasn't glamorous, not dramatic, not the gowns you've seen in paintings. It was the morning gown, soft, pale, almost quiet in personality. Long sleeves, high neckline, no bright colors, no loud patterns. Because mornings were not for beauty, they were for modesty. You could almost hear society whispering, "Don't look too eager to impress." Dignity starts with restraint. Colors mattered. Oh, they mattered more than you can imagine. A soft cream dress meant innocence. A pale blue meant grace. Lavender meant quiet refinement. But a bright red, a bold scarlet, people wouldn't say anything to your face. But the glances, they would cut deeper than scissors shaping the fabric. One wrong color, one slightly daring shade, and suddenly the room was thinking things about you, things you never said. Meant, never did. That was the weight of fashion in the Regency era. You didn't choose it. It chose what society would think of you. As the lady stands before her mirror, her maid ties a delicate ribbon around her waist. Not tight, because unlike the Victorians who came later, Regency women didn't use heavy corsets. They didn't need to. Their posture did the job. Straight back, lifted chin, relaxed shoulders, every movement deliberate, almost floating. Her governess would whisper, years earlier, "Stand like you're balancing a book on your head. Sit like your spine is a line drawn by God himself." And she obeyed, because a lady who slouched wasn't a lady. A girl who walked too fast lacked grace. A girl who swung her arms looked childish. Her body, her clothes, her behavior, all choreographed. But it didn't end there. No, this was just morning. Because as daylight moved, so did the rules. By noon, she might change again. A slightly more decorative gown. A touch of embroidery. A hint of personality, but only a hint. And then, evening. This was an entirely different world, and every woman knew it. Evening gowns were not optional. They were statements. Soft silk, empire waistline, short sleeves that carefully revealed but never exposed. Necklines lower, but calculated, always calculated. The gown wasn't simply worn, it was performed. And nothing, absolutely nothing, was more ritualistic than the ball gown. A ball wasn't just dancing. It was matchmaking. It was reputation. It was politics stitched into fabric. A lady arrived wearing a gown that whispered, "I am worthy." Not with arrogance, but with elegance so controlled, so intentional, that even the slightest detail spoke volumes. The gloves, long, white, symbolic, because bare hands in a ballroom meant vulnerability, meant intimacy, meant something improper. The fan, not for cooling, for communication. A flick open, a slow wave, a tiny tilt. These weren't movements. These were sentences. "I'm interested. Come closer. Stay away. My mother is watching, don't even think about it. The shawl. A final layer of modesty, even though it often slipped over the shoulders in a way that made poets write sonnets. Everything mattered. Everything spoke. And yet, the strangest rule of all. A lady must never overdress. Imagine preparing for the biggest ball of the year. Imagine the gowns, the jewels, the candles, the music. And imagine being told, shine, but not too brightly. Be beautiful, but not bold. Be elegant, but never attention-seeking. It's like asking a flower to bloom only halfway. Some girls whispered to their mirrors, how do I be impressive without looking like I tried? And they never found the answer, because the answer wasn't theirs to find. Society held it hostage. But perhaps the most subtle, most painful part of all this is that clothing became a quiet judge of character. Too simple? She's dull. She lacks charm. Too decorated? She's vain. She's desperate. Too modest? She's weak, unimpressive. Well, the room didn't need words to destroy her reputation. One gown could change how families saw her, how suitors saw her, how her own parents measured her future. And she knew it, which is why late at night, after the ball ends, after the music dies, after the candles burn low, a lady might stand alone in her room, untying her gown's delicate ribbon, and whisper to herself, who am I when I'm not wearing all this? Her reflection didn't always answer. Because clothes weren't just clothes. They were rules, expectations, invisible bars. And a lady, she lived inside them. Quietly, gracefully, unquestioningly. Even when her heart wanted otherwise. Sometimes a lady would stand by the window before dressing for an evening event, and she'd watch ordinary people in the street. A group of boys running, their shirts untucked, their laughter wild and uncontrolled. A woman selling flowers, sleeves rolled, hands stained with the scent of roses. A maid carrying a basket, walking quickly, freely, without worrying how her skirt swung. And for a moment, just a moment, the lady would wonder how it must feel to move without fear of judgment, to breathe without thinking about posture, to choose clothes not for society, but for comfort, or joy, or simply because she liked them. But she would step back from the window, because curiosity was allowed. Freedom was not. The truth is, Regency clothing didn't simply shape a woman's body. It shaped her voice, her identity, her destiny. You could see it in the fabric choices alone. A soft muslin gown meant innocence, but muslin was fragile, transparent when wet, difficult to maintain. So society said, a lady must look delicate, even if the dress cannot survive a single accident. A stronger fabric like velvet or brocade, those were for older women, married women, women allowed to be bold. Youth had to be fragile, youth had to be graceful, youth had to look like it belonged in a painting. And girls, they learned this quietly, painfully. A young girl might stand before her wardrobe, fingers brushing the fabrics, and she would feel it, that silent push toward perfection, like the clothes themselves were whispering, be better, be softer, be quieter, be what they expect, and she obeyed. But because she didn't know another world existed. There were rules hidden in every corner of her clothing. A morning gown allowed her to walk in the garden, but not too fast, or the delicate hem would catch the dew and stain. That would be careless. A lady was never careless. An afternoon dress allowed embroidery or lace, but too much decoration meant arrogance. Too little meant lack of effort. A shawl draped too loosely could seem flirtatious. A shawl wrapped too tightly could seem rigid. Even how she held her gloves mattered. 2 fingers? Too casual. Folded neatly? Proper. Twisting them nervously? Oh no, that meant unstable emotions, unladylike behavior. And then there was the fan, that delicate painted fan that seemed innocent, but carried a language older than the ballrooms themselves. A slow wave? I am polite. A closed fan held against the chest. Do not approach. A quick flick open. You have my attention. A deep fold held low. I am displeased. And everyone knew. Everyone understood. It was a silent world made of gestures instead of words. because a lady rarely got to speak her mind. Her clothes spoke for her. Imagine being a young woman in that society, standing in a crowded ballroom, music playing, candles glowing like stars caught inside glass, and you're wearing a perfect gown that everyone admires. But no one knows you. Not really. They know the dress, the gloves, the posture, the carefully controlled smile, but they don't know the thoughts she hides behind those layered fabrics. They don't know her fears, her dreams, her questions. She might be thinking, I wish I could run, I wish I could dance without worrying how I look. I wish someone asked what I want. But the moment she steps forward to dance, all society sees is her flawless gown, her graceful movements, her obedience to the rules, and she disappears inside the performance. Because Regency fashion wasn't decoration, it was identity. It was armor. It was a mask she learned to wear from childhood. Her governess would spend hours teaching her. This sleeve makes you respectable. This color makes you calm. This ribbon shows you are modest. This gown will help you find a good match. No one asked if she wanted a match. No one asked what she liked. Clothes were her destiny. Even the celebrated empire waistline, the one people today love for its elegance, came with quiet consequences. It softened the body, made women look gentler, smaller, more childlike. Society wanted that. Society demanded that. Because a woman who looked too powerful, too confident, too present, threatened the balance. So the dresses hid strength. They hid muscles. They hid maturity. They created an illusion that women were fragile creatures meant to be guided, protected, controlled. And yet, even inside this delicate prison, some ladies found ways to breathe. A girl might choose a slightly bolder shade of blue just to feel alive. She might add tiny flowers to her sash, even if no one noticed. She might loosen her gloves when no one was looking. She might walk a little faster in the hallway just to feel the skirt brush her ankles with freedom. Tiny rebellions, small secrets that gave her a sense of self. Because clothes could control her, but they could not kill her spirit. There's something strangely beautiful about that. A quiet resistance, a silent fight inside layers of silk. And maybe that's why late at night, after a long day of performing elegance, a lady would sit by her mirror, her hair loosened, her gown set aside, her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time all day, she looked like herself. No posture lessons, no gloves, no controlling colors, no judgment hidden in fabric. Just a girl, breathing freely, in her own skin. And in that fragile, fleeting moment, she would feel something she couldn't name. Something like longing. Something like hunger. Something like the taste of freedom she had never known. But dawn always came. And with dawn, the clothes returned. The expectations returned. The silent rules returned. Because she was a lady, and a lady didn't live for herself. She lived for society. Yet deep inside, beneath every ribbon, every gown, every perfectly placed fold, there was a heart that dreamed of a world where clothes were not cages, and a woman could choose who she wanted to be. A drawing room in the Regency era always felt like a stage. Not because people performed music or read poetry, but because every breath, every glance, every small polite smile was a quiet performance of its own. You walk into one of those rooms, and the first thing you notice is the stillness. Not silence, stillness. A fireplace crackling softly, teacups resting on delicate saucers, a few ladies sitting with perfect posture, hands folded, gowns arranged like paintings come to life. Men standing, talking in low voices, pretending not to observe the women they were absolutely observing. A girl enters the room, or a young lady. It's her first season, her first social gathering outside family, and she freezes. Because this room, this gentle, elegant room, holds a truth no one told her loudly, only whispered into her training. A lady may never start a conversation. Imagine that. You're surrounded by people, yet you cannot speak unless spoken to. You cannot approach. You cannot initiate. You cannot even greet a gentleman first without raising eyebrows or causing whispers later. So she stands there for a second too long. And in the Regency world, a second too long meant nerves. Nerves meant inexperience. Inexperience meant immaturity. Everything was judgment. Her mother gives her a tiny nod, barely visible, but clear. Don't attract attention. She chooses a seat by the window. Not too close to the center. That would be bold. Not too far. That would look timid. Even sitting had rules, and she knew every one of them. Back straight. Feet together. Hands relaxed, but never idle. Eyes lowered, but not too lowered. Quiet, but not cold. The art of being present without being noticeable. Across the room, two older women sip tea and watch her with the kind of gentle scrutiny that looks polite on the outside, but cuts like glass on the inside. One of them whispers, "She has a sweet face." The other replies, "Yes, but she stares too long. She must learn to soften her gaze." Eye contact. Such a small thing, and yet a battlefield. Too much eye contact meant boldness, improper, almost scandalous. Too little eye contact meant lack of confidence. A lady had to look at a gentleman like the sunlight, warm, brief, never burning. A soft glance, a tiny flash of interest, then eyes down, as though retreating into a world of modesty. She practiced that for years. Even in childhood, her governess scolded her. Don't look directly at a gentleman. Look near him, past him, or at something delicate, a flower, a teacup. That is how a lady protects her dignity. So now, sitting in a real drawing room, she does exactly that. A gentleman approaches, tall, well-pressed coat, calm expression. Her heart stutters, but she doesn't speak. He bows politely. "Good afternoon, miss." She lowers her eyes just slightly, enough to show modesty, not enough to show fear. "Good afternoon, sir." This is the dance. But the dance has rules. He speaks first. He asks gentle questions. Her answers must be short, soft, and pleasant. Not too clever, not too bold, not too emotional. Because a woman who spoke too much risked ruining her reputation. She answers with the same gentle rhythm every governess drilled into her. "Yes, sir. No, sir. It is a lovely day. I enjoy reading. My mother is well, thank you." Not because she has nothing else to say, but because she is not allowed to say it. But sometimes, just sometimes, conversation carried a secret message. He might say, "Do you enjoy music, miss?" And if she liked him, she might reply, "I do, especially when the company is pleasant." A tiny hint, a fragile step towards something deeper, one phrase wrapped in layers of politeness. This was flirting, soft, delicate, hidden beneath etiquette, because real flirting, the bold kind, the modern kind, was unthinkable. Instead, girls learned a different language, the language of fans. She holds hers now, resting lightly in her lap. Painted silk, ivory ribs, a little creak when she opens it. But the moment she lifts it, the air around her changes. A fan wasn't decoration, it was voice. A slow, steady wave meant she was approachable. A quick flutter meant nervous excitement. Touching the tip to her chin meant thoughtfulness, curiosity. Letting it shield part of her face meant she needed distance. And closing it suddenly, that was rejection. A polite one, a silent one, but rejection nonetheless. One wrong gesture, though, could cause whispers, because the Regency world was fragile, too fragile, easily disturbed. A lady who laughed too loudly? Improper, uncontrolled, unrefined. A girl who turned her head too quickly toward a gentleman. Forward, impulsive, suspicious. Praise had rules too. A man could say, "You look well today, miss." But he could not say she looked beautiful. That was too intimate, too daring, too romantic. Her friends could say her dress was charming, her handwriting elegant, her manners lovely. But calling her eyes beautiful, her smile enchanting, her voice soft and warm? No. Too close, too personal, too revealing. Because praise could create meaning. Meaning could create rumors, and rumors could create scandal. And scandal was death. You didn't need to break a rule to create one. You just needed to look like you might. A slightly too long conversation. A laugh that sounded a bit too bright. A moment, just a moment, where she forgot to lower her gaze soon enough. People would talk. They always did. Someone would whisper, "Did you see the way she smiled? Far too familiar." Another would reply, "Yes, I fear she has not been well taught." And the girl would sit there, unaware of the storm building from a single harmless gesture. This was the truth of polite conversation in the Regency era. You had to speak without speaking too much. Hint without revealing. Smile without laughing too loudly. Show interest without appearing eager. Reject without hurting dignity. And somehow, inside these impossible rules, women still managed to build connections, friendships, romance, hope. They created entire conversations with their eyes, fans, and soft gestures. Conversations no man could ever translate fully. Sometimes a girl would sit in the drawing room, surrounded by people, yet she carried a loneliness no one could see. She wanted to talk freely, to laugh loudly, to ask bold questions, to tell stories, to speak her mind, but she couldn't. Because in the Regency world, a lady's silence was her crown. Even when it felt heavy, even when it hurt, even when her voice trembled inside her chest, wanting to be heard. Sometimes, the most dangerous moments in a Regency gathering weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. They were tiny. So tiny, you wouldn't even notice them unless you knew exactly where to look. A girl shifting slightly in her seat when a gentleman entered. A half-second smile that lingered too long. A whisper between two ladies in the corner, quickly silenced the moment someone looked their way. These little fragments of human nature, curiosity, interest, nerves, longing, were all potential sparks. And in this society, even a spark could become a wildfire. There was a reason every girl in that room sat so carefully, breathed so quietly, laughed so softly. Because scandal didn't need proof. Scandal only needed a story. And stories, oh, those spread faster than candlelight in a breeze. Imagine a perfectly normal afternoon. A drawing room filled with tea, quiet talk, gentle smiles. A young lady sits near the piano. Pretty, polite. Not remarkable enough to attract too much attention, but not forgettable either. A gentleman offers her a biscuit from the tray. A harmless gesture. She accepts with a soft thank you. Her fingers brush his for the tiniest moment. A normal accident. Nothing more. But in the Regency world, that tiny touch could bloom into a whispered tragedy. Someone across the room leans toward her companion. Did you see that? I did. Quite bold, wasn't it? I fear she is too comfortable with him. And suddenly, a brush of fingers becomes a story of secret affection. A story becomes a rumor. A rumor becomes a truth. Not because it's real, but because people enjoy believing it. That's the invisible danger every girl carried around her. One wrong moment, one wrong step, one wrong breath, and her reputation cracked like porcelain. This is why the art of polite conversation wasn't about words. It was about survival. Every answer was calculated, every expression measured, every pause intentional. If a gentleman asked, "Do you enjoy the company this evening?" a careless girl might say, "Oh yes, very much." But that sounded too enthusiastic, too eager, too personal. A trained lady would choose instead, "It has been pleasant, sir." Soft, neutral, safe. A gentleman might ask, "May I escort you to the terrace for fresh air?" The wrong answer, "Yes, I would like that," was too forward. Instead, she might say, "If my mother approves, sir, then perhaps." She didn't refuse him. She didn't accept him. She stayed balanced on that thin, trembling line society forced her to walk. And beneath all of this, beneath the delicate fans and the courteous bows and the quiet conversations, there was a deeper truth nobody admitted. Girls wanted connection. Real connection. Not the rehearsed, guarded, suffocating choreography of polite society. Speak without permission. Look at someone because they felt something, not because etiquette allowed it. But every girl knew the risk. A laugh too bright? Uncontrolled. A joke too bold? Unrefined. A conversation too long? Improper. This fear shaped every gathering. Imagine sitting among people and feeling as though every pair of eyes is measuring you, evaluating you, waiting for you to slip so they can discuss it later over tea. That pressure could crush anyone, and yet girls lived under it every day. But here's the remarkable part. Even inside that crushing silence, women found ways to speak. Not with words, with subtlety. A lady might tilt her head slightly while listening, showing genuine interest without appearing too involved. She might tap her fan lightly against her wrist, a signal to her friends that she needed help escaping a dull or uncomfortable conversation. She might lift her teacup with a soft, steady hand, showing calmness even if her heart was trembling inside. This was communication, secret, silent, beautiful in its own way. And then there were the moments that made everything worth it. Moments when two people, trapped inside all these rules, managed to create a connection anyway. A shared glance across the room, a pause that lasted half a breath longer than it should, a smile that felt too warm to be merely polite. These tiny rebellions, these delicate escapes from stiffness, were the closest thing to freedom a girl could get. And she held on to them, secretly, quietly, like stolen fire. But the world didn't stop judging. Once, at a tea gathering in Bath, a young lady dropped her fan, just slipped from her fingers and hit the carpet. A harmless human mistake. But the room changed. A couple of women exchanged glances. A gentleman raised an eyebrow. Someone whispered, "Nervous behavior. I wonder why." Suddenly her dropped fan meant she was unstable, or hiding something, or emotionally fragile. The truth? Her hand was simply tired. But society rarely cared about truth. It cared about appearance. And appearance was everything. Women spent their entire lives practicing calmness, grace, soft words, measured steps, controlled laughter, delicate expressions, because the alternative, the slightest deviation, could define them forever. Imagine being judged forever because you laughed too loudly at 16, or because you spoke too quickly at a party once,
or because your hands trembled during your first real conversation with a gentleman.
It sounds absurd now, but back then, those moments built or destroyed your future. And still, beneath all the pressure, women created beauty in conversation. Soft, careful beauty. They learned how to say no without actually saying no. "How kind of you to offer, sir, but I fear I cannot. I would be honored, but my mother expects me." A lovely suggestion, though I must decline. Polite refusals wrapped in silk. They learned to encourage too, to show interest without stepping over the invisible lines. That must have taken great effort. I admire your dedication. Your words are thoughtful. Every sentence shaped like a petal. Soft, harmless, safe, and still meaningful. And maybe that's the most extraordinary part of this world, that inside all the suffocating rules, women built an entire language of their own. A language made of glances, pauses, breath, fans, smiles, that men never truly understood. A language powerful enough to create connection, but subtle enough to survive in silence, because they had to survive. Every day, every moment, every tiny decision. A girl in the Regency era didn't just learn how to speak politely. She learned how to exist politely, even when her real voice lived quietly inside her heart, waiting, hoping that one day she could speak freely without fear. Love, in the Regency era, didn't feel like the stories people tell today. It wasn't wild, it wasn't loud, it wasn't free. It was quiet, slow, breathing behind walls, waiting behind rules. A girl might feel her heart beat faster when a certain gentleman entered a room, but she couldn't take a single step toward him, not even half. A glance was allowed, but only once, and only soft. Anything more, and she'd be considered forward. Imagine living in a world where you couldn't even feel freely, let alone act freely. A lady was never alone, never. If she walked to the garden, another woman followed. If she went to the dressmaker, someone walked behind her. If she took evening air, someone watched from the window. A girl's life was a long corridor of supervision. And romance lived in the spaces between footstep and heartbeat. A chaperone, an older woman, usually a relative, was the silent shadow of every girl. Always 2 steps behind, always listening, always observing. The purpose wasn't protection from danger. The purpose was protection from gossip. Because a girl could lose everything, her respect, her marriage prospects, her future, with one moment of being seen alone with the wrong man. One moment. She could be perfectly innocent, and still ruined. So when two hearts grew close, they had to grow in silence.
A young lady might sit in a drawing room, pretending to read, while her eyes secretly searched for one pair of footsteps. His. She might feel the warmth of his presence from across the room, but she couldn't move an inch toward him. Him, he had to approach. He had to bow first. He had to speak first. A woman proposing love? Impossible. Unthinkable. Almost scandalous to even imagine. She waited, always waited. And in that waiting, a strange mix of hope and sorrow lived inside her. Even letters, even love letters, were not truly private. A girl couldn't write freely. Her words had to be delicate, cautious, respectable. No passionate expressions, no emotional recklessness, no direct confessions. A girl might write, "I hope the season finds you well." But inside she wanted to write, "I think of you every night." She might write, "I trust your journey was pleasant." But in her heart whispered, "I prayed for you the whole time." Her ink carried two voices, the one society approved of, and the one she hid for survival. Even receiving a letter had rules. If a gentleman sent a note, it could not be handed to her directly. It went through her mother, or her governess, or her aunt. She read it under their eyes, sometimes aloud, pretending her heart wasn't trembling inside her chest. When a gentleman wished to express interest, he couldn't simply confess. Confession was too intimate. Instead, he showed it through small, careful gestures. He might offer her the first dance at a ball. He might ask about her family. He might inquire about her well-being a little more warmly than usual. Safe steps, but never too close, never too fast. And when a man finally felt ready to propose, he didn't kneel in front of the woman he loved. He knocked on her father's door. A girl didn't choose. She waited to be chosen. Sometimes she hoped the right man would ask. Sometimes she prayed the wrong man wouldn't. But choices, real choices, they rarely belonged to her. Marriage wasn't just love. Marriage was wealth, status, property, land, family connections, future security. Two families married each other, not two hearts. A girl might love a gentle, kind man with no fortune, but her parents glanced at estates, income, lineage. A girl might feel nothing for a wealthy man, but society whispered, "Such a good match." This world didn't ask what a woman felt. It asked what she represented. If she brought grace, respectability, discipline, silence, then she was worthy. And yet, beneath all the structure, all the supervision, all the suffocating rules, girls still felt everything deeply. They felt longing. They felt butterflies at the slightest glance. They felt jealous when another girl received a man's attention. They felt heartbreak when someone they adored became distant. They felt love like anyone else, maybe even more intensely, because they weren't allowed to show it. And the saddest part was this. A girl could lose her future in one moment. If she was seen walking alone with a man, ruined. If she smiled a little too freely, questionable. If she wrote a letter without supervision, dangerous. If a rumor, just a rumor, started, finished. A girl lived inside a cage built of expectations, invisible but unbreakable. And yet she kept hoping. She kept dreaming. She kept waiting for a love that might somehow slip through the cracks of all these rules. Sometimes love won. Sometimes it survived. Two people exchanged glances, then words, then carefully controlled emotions. Until one day, a man gathered enough courage to speak to her father. Sometimes her heart raced with joy. Sometimes it froze in fear. Because love in the Regency world wasn't a story of freedom. It was a story of quiet endurance. And every girl, every single girl, carried that story inside her, waiting for the moment when all her quiet, controlled, hidden feelings finally became a life she could call her own. Love was a dangerous thing in the Regency world. Not dangerous in the way of swords or storms, but dangerous in a quiet, suffocating way. A way that touched the heart first, then the reputation, and then the entire life of a young woman. People today talk about romance like it's a fire, bright, warm, consuming. But for a girl in that era, romance was a candle held inside a glass box. It could light up her world, or it could burn down everything she had. The rules, The expectations, the silent eyes watching her every move, they were always there. She learned them long before she learned what love meant. A girl could not walk alone. She could not sit alone. She could not even stand at the end of a hallway if a man happened to be there. A chaperone was not just a guardian. She was a reminder. A living, breathing reminder that a lady's freedom was not her own. Her mother, an aunt, sometimes even a strict neighbor. Someone always hovered beside her with a practiced smile and a quiet warning inside their eyes. Don't forget what you are. And because she heard it day after day, she began to carry the same warning inside her own chest. Romance didn't begin with a bold confession. It began with hesitation, with glances so small, so soft, that they barely existed. A man could not simply walk up and say, "I like you." That was too direct, too improper, too dangerous. So romance lived in pauses, in the tiny moment before the music started at a ball, in the moment their hands touched for the briefest second while exchanging a cup of tea, in the stolen half-smile that lasted the length of a heartbeat. Most of the time, that was all, because anything more, any moment too long, any smile too obvious, any whisper too warm, could destroy her reputation. It's strange, isn't it? One rumor could ruin a girl's entire future. Not a crime, not a sin, just a whisper. He spoke to her, alone. She walked in the garden, without a chaperone. She stayed too long near him after the dance. Sometimes the rumor didn't even need to be true. The idea alone was enough. A girl's purity wasn't something she controlled. It was something the world judged. Look down once when you should have looked up, and suddenly people wondered why. But still, romance bloomed. Quietly, secretly, bravely. There was a strange kind of beauty in it. A beauty that came from longing, from wanting to stand closer, but knowing you couldn't speak, but being terrified of being overheard. The drawing rooms were the battlefield of this gentle war. Ladies sat with perfect posture, men stood at safe distances, and conversations floated through the air like feathers dropped from a distance. Soft, controlled, measured. A woman could not approach a man first. She could not start a conversation. She could not hint, confess, ask, or propose. If she did, if she made the slightest move, she would be labeled fast, desperate, indecent. So she waited. And waiting slowly became a part of her personality. When she did speak to a man, her voice had to be low, polite, carefully woven. She had to speak like someone protecting herself from her own emotions. And the man, he had to pretend he wasn't affected at all. Too much interest made him appear weak. Too much charm made her appear cheap. That strange balance created a tension that made their small interactions feel electric. And then, there were the letters. Ah, the letters. Love in that era lived inside folded pieces of paper. Secret, fragile, trembling with meaning. But even a letter had rules. Too much affection? Improper. Too emotional? Shameful. Too short? Insincere. Too long? Desperate. Every sentence was a risk. Every word was a gamble. She would read a single line 10 times trying to understand what he truly meant. Then she would take an entire evening to write one delicate reply, her hands shaking, her mind racing. Heart. Terrified. And the letter itself? It couldn't be delivered directly. It had to pass through maids or siblings or accidental book exchanges. Half the excitement was the fear of being caught. A girl didn't just fall in love. She risked love. She protected it, hid it, fed it quietly like a forbidden flame. Because if someone saw that flame, the world would rush to put it out. Marriage was not a simple matter of two hearts meeting. It was a negotiation, a business deal disguised with polite smiles. Families examined wealth, property, social standing, future alliances. Two people could adore each other deeply and still be told they were unsuitable. Imagine loving someone with all your heart and being told that your emotions don't matter because his estate isn't large enough, or her dowry isn't generous enough, or their family name carries the wrong kind of history. So many romances died quietly at the doorstep of practicality. And yet, the heart kept trying. There were girls who prayed each night for the man they loved to gather the courage to propose. There were girls who walked into every ballroom with a tiny blooming hope inside them. Maybe tonight, maybe this dance, maybe he will choose me. And then there were the harder stories, the heartbreaks that lived under silence, the engagements arranged without love, the marriages made from pressure, duty, desperation. A girl could cry in her room, could break inside her own chest, could wish with everything she had, but she could never say no if her family said yes. Fit inside the rules, inside the expectations, inside the cage she was born into. And despite all this, or maybe because of all this, love in the Regency world felt strangely intense. It was never casual, never careless, never loud. It was fragile, precious, hidden like a small bird in a storm. A brush of fingertips could feel like a confession. A shared glance could feel like a promise. One slow dance under the chandelier could echo inside her for months. Because every moment was forbidden, and forbidden things always shine brighter. But the danger was always there too. A girl could lose everything, her chance at marriage, her respect, her future, because of a single misunderstood moment. She could be innocent, she could be truthful, she could be kind. None of that mattered. Society only needed a reason. Sometimes the reason didn't even have to be real. So she learned to move carefully, speak carefully, smile carefully, even feel carefully. Can you imagine that? Having to monitor your own heart, like it's something wild you must keep chained? Some girls managed to find real love inside these rules, some didn't. Some married for security and slowly learned affection. Some married for duty and never found joy at all. Some loved someone in silence for years and never had the chance to say it aloud. Love, courtship, marriage, they were all threads woven inside a web of rules. And yet the human heart still beat. Behind it all, still hoped, still ached, still dreamed. Because rules can cage a girl's actions, but never her emotions. And that was the quiet tragedy of Regency romance. Not the absence of love, but the impossibility of truly reaching for it. The night always felt different during the Regency era. Not louder, not brighter, but heavier. As if the entire world held its breath the moment the first carriage rolled toward the grand entrance of a ballroom. People today go to parties to relax. Back then, a ball wasn't just an event. It was a battlefield wrapped in silk and candlelight. Every smile mattered. Every glance carried weight. Every dance could change a girl's future. You could almost feel the tension from outside the building. Carriages lined up like a slow-moving procession, the wheels crunching against gravel, horses snorting clouds of breath into the cold evening air. Lanterns swung gently on hooks, casting golden, trembling circles across the path. Inside the ballroom, everything glittered. The chandeliers seemed too bright, as if they were trying to catch every secret hidden beneath the polished floor. Musicians tuned their instruments with thin, nervous breaths. Servants hurried through corridors like ghosts, carrying trays of sherbet, wine, and nervous expectations. And the girls, they always arrived with trembling hearts. A ball was the single place where a young woman could show herself. Not freely, never freely, but enough. Enough for society to assess her grace, her beauty, her manners, her marriageability. She didn't dress for comfort. She dressed for judgment. Her gown would be soft, flowing, empire-waisted. Light colors in the evenings, rarely anything bold. Her hair pinned up in curls that tugged a little too tightly. Her gloves reaching up her arms like symbols of purity. And somewhere deep inside her chest, a prayer she never said. Please let tonight be kind to me. Men entered the ballroom with far less fear. They had freedoms a woman could barely imagine. But even they felt the pressure of the evening. Choosing the right partner, asking for the right dances, avoiding bold moves that looked improper. The moment the first notes of music drifted through the air, the crowd shifted like a single living thing. Eyes lifted. Mothers straightened up. Young men braced themselves. And girls breathed in, soft, quiet, hopeful. A dance wasn't just a dance. It was communication. It was a coded exchange of interest, respect, curiosity, or caution. When a man approached a girl and offered his hand, everything happened in silence first. Her heart leapt. Her mother watched. Her friends whispered. Every single person waited to see whether she would accept. Sometimes she wanted to say yes with all her heart, but had to say no, because saying yes too quickly looked desperate. And sometimes she wanted to say no, but forced herself to say yes, because saying no would start a scandal. Her choices were never hers alone. When she finally placed her gloved hand in his, there was a tiny spark. Not always romantic, but undeniably human. A small reminder that beneath all these rules, there were real people with real beating hearts. They would take their place on the floor. Silk skirts whispering across polished wood, gentlemen standing tall, with practiced elegance. Suddenly the room shifted again. From tension to rhythm. In those moments, the world outside the dance faded. People didn't talk. They floated. The steps were precise, almost mathematical. Patterns of approach and retreat, touch and release, glance and turn. But the emotions were anything but controlled. A girl's heart sped up whenever his hand touched her waist. Just for a second. Barely there, but enough to send a warm shock through her entire body. He pretended not to notice. She pretended not to feel it. Both of them failed. When their eyes met, it wasn't just a look. It was a question. Do you feel this too? But they never asked it. The rules didn't allow such boldness. Sometimes a man tried to speak during the dance. A soft compliment. A harmless question. But a lady had to answer carefully, politely, without leaning in too closely, without revealing too much emotion. Her words were like flower petals. Soft, measured, never falling out of place. There were moments, rare, delicate, precious, when the music slowed, and the steps drew them nearer than they were allowed to be. And in that closeness, in that impossible nearness, a girl could feel every beat of her own heart, echoing in her ribs like a secret drum. To laugh too much was improper.
To hold a gaze too long was unforgettable. And unforgettable things were often the beginning of rumors.
And rumors were poison.
So she controlled herself. She held her breath when emotions rose too high.
She blinked too fast when her eyes felt too warm. She smiled just enough to be polite, never enough to reveal longing. And yet, that longing always found a way to speak. Sometimes it lived in her silence, sometimes in the trembling of her fingertips, sometimes in the way she tried too hard to look away. And when the music ended, when they stepped apart, bowed to one another, and whispered, "Thank you," a girl carried that moment inside her like a folded secret she couldn't open again. But the night wasn't just dancing, it was strategy. Mothers watched as if studying a battlefield. Aunts whispered names of wealthy bachelors. Girls exchanged glances filled with fear, hope, envy, and sometimes heartbreak. Every dance meant something. Even the lack of a dance meant something. If a man didn't ask a girl to dance, people whispered. If he asked her twice, people whispered more. If he asked her too many times, it wasn't allowed. Everything beautiful had limits, especially for women. One misstep, one dance too long, one laugh too loud, one step onto the terrace without a chaperone, and her reputation cracked like fragile glass. She wasn't just dancing. She was protecting herself while pretending to enjoy the night. And then there were the hidden meanings. The coded gestures. The secret language of fans, gloves, and even the way she stood. A girl dropping her fan didn't always mean clumsiness. Sometimes it meant, "I want to speak to you, but I cannot." A fan touching her cheek meant, "You interest me." Closing the fan quickly meant, "Do not approach." Holding the fan near her lips? A silent, breathless message, "I will keep your secret." Men pretended they didn't recognize the signals, but they did. They just weren't supposed to admit it. A ballroom was a place of beauty, but beneath that beauty lived a world of hidden emotions that girls were forced to carry quietly. And late at night, when the last carriage finally rolled away, when the candles dimmed, when her mother's watchful eyes softened, a girl would sit alone in her room and replay every moment, every glance, every touch, every heartbeat. Did he look at her with real interest, or was she imagining it? Did he choose her for the dance, or was she just another polite obligation? Did his hand linger for a second too long, or was it merely the flow of the waltz? She would never truly know. Love in the Regency world was a puzzle missing half its pieces. But still, she dreamed, because dreams were the only thing no rule could take away from her. Night in the Regency world had a strange way of becoming deeper as the ball progressed. In the beginning, everything felt bright. The lights, the gowns, the music, the hopeful energy floating in the air. But as the night drew on, something softer took over. Something more secret, more intimate, more dangerous. The polished floor slowly lost its shine under tired shoes. The chandeliers flickered as candle wax dripped down their sides. Voices turned quieter. Laughter became thinner, and the excitement that burst at the start of the evening settled into something more vulnerable. That was when real emotions started to surface. A girl might dance 10 times before she even realized she was tired. But then the music softened, the air grew warmer, and she finally allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding back. She noticed the ache in her feet from standing too straight for too long. She noticed the tightness of the gloves that were supposed to make her look elegant. She noticed the weight of the curls pulling at her scalp, and somewhere inside her, she noticed the shaking of her own heart. Because at that hour, when people grew comfortable, their masks slipped, just a little. A man no longer stood as tall. A girl no longer pretended not to feel nervous. Mothers stopped following every move with hawk-like eyes. And the music finally felt like a companion instead of a performance. It was during these softer moments that the quietest, most forbidden things happened. A girl might find herself standing beside a column, catching her breath, her hands warm inside her gloves, her thoughts loud in her mind. And then she would sense someone near her, not touching, not speaking, just standing close enough to create a small, trembling tension in the air. She would glance sideways and catch a glimpse of a face she had danced with earlier, a face she had tried not to think about, a face she had hoped might look at her again. And when their eyes met, just for one flickering moment, the entire world seemed to quiet down. No music, no people, no rules. Just a heartbeat. 2, maybe. Then she would look away too quickly, because she had to. Because looking too long meant admitting something she wasn't allowed to admit. A man might clear his throat, as if trying to hide the fact that he was thinking of what to say. He wasn't supposed to talk to her alone, not without a chaperone. Even standing near her like this was skating dangerously close to impropriety. But sometimes emotions didn't wait for permission. He might lean in, not close enough to be scandalous, but close enough that she could feel the edge of his breath brushing her cheek like a secret. "Are you enjoying the evening?" His voice would be soft, careful, carrying more meaning than the words themselves. She would swallow the storm inside her and answer gently, "Yes, very much." Just that. 2 simple words, but said with a voice that trembled because it carried every unspoken thing beneath it. Her eyes would lift for a second, just enough to read his expression. Was he being polite? Or was there something more? A girl never truly knew. That uncertainty was both torture and beauty. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her again, from across the room. His gaze soft, almost questioning, as if he wanted to walk toward her but didn't trust himself to do so. She might look away, but her pulse would keep running. Her hands would shake inside her gloves, because of a man she had spoken to for less than a minute. And yet, that 1 minute could stay with her for years. A ballroom was full of eyes, curious eyes, judging eyes, calculating eyes. But sometimes 2 people found each other in the middle of that chaos and shared a quiet moment that felt like a secret carved out of time. Those were the moments girls carried home with them. But the night wasn't all sweetness and longing. There were shadows too. Whispers behind fans, silent competitions among girls, jealous glances from mothers who wanted the best match for their daughters. Every smile had an intention. Every gesture had a meaning. Every dance had consequences. Imagine a girl dancing 3 times with the same man. Today it would mean nothing. Back then, it was practically a declaration. People would talk. People always talked. "Did you see? 3 times now. Her mother must be planning something. His family will object. Just wait." Rumors formed faster than music notes. A shy girl could find herself the center of gossip without doing anything wrong. A confident girl could be labeled bold, even if she followed every rule. No one warned them that the world was eager to misunderstand them. Sometimes that misunderstanding turned cruel. If a girl stepped into the hallway for air, someone could claim she was hiding with a man. If she turned red from heat, someone could whisper it was because of secret passion. If she smiled at one person too warmly, people assumed her heart was already promised. Life inside a ballroom wasn't just dancing. It was a delicate, exhausting performance. But somewhere between the dances and the judgments and the risks, something like magic still lived. Near the end of the night, the dances grew slower, the lights dimmer, and the evening took on a dreamlike glow. Girls leaned into their mothers, tired but glowing. Men tugged at their uncomfortable cravats. Servants discreetly rubbed their aching arms. Even the chandeliers looked tired. But tiredness often made people honest. A man who had been too polite earlier might finally show a hint of sincerity. A girl who had been too careful might allow a small, genuine smile. And sometimes something braver happened. A man might approach a girl for the final dance of the evening. The moment he asked, the whole room felt it. The first dance of the night carried honor. The last dance carried meaning. A girl's breath would catch. Her mother's eyebrows would lift. Girls would glance sideways with envy or curiosity. And if she said yes, if she placed her tired, gloved hand in his, the last dance became the quiet climax of the entire night. Slow, unhurried, beautiful in its restraint. They would move together through the fading candlelight, feet brushing the floor softly, bodies close enough to feel each other's warmth, but not close enough to break the rules. Their eyes might meet, not quickly this time, but deeply. Honestly, no one else would exist in that moment. Not the rules, not the whispers, not the expectations. Just two people floating in a fragile freedom, granted only by the final minutes of the night. When the music finally stopped, and they stepped back and bowed their formal goodbyes, the air around them would feel different, as if something had happened without actually happening. Something real inside a cage of impossibility. The ball would end. People would gather their shawls, their gloves, their tired children and leave in a slow stream. But a girl would carry one thing with her, a feeling she couldn't explain, a warmth in her chest, a trembling in her fingers, a question in her heart that she hoped the universe might answer someday. And when she climbed into her carriage, when the door shut, when the cold night pressed quietly against the windows, she would finally exhale. Her mother might talk, her friends might giggle, horses might trot steadily through the dark road home. But her mind would be somewhere else. Back in the ballroom, back in the last dance, back in the moment their eyes met, and she felt something that wasn't allowed, but was still deeply, painfully real. That was the true secret of Regency nights. Not the candles, not the gowns, not the dances, but the emotions people weren't allowed to show. Love didn't bloom in the open. It bloomed in shadows, in pauses, in stolen glances, in gestures that lasted half a second, but echoed for half a lifetime. And that is what made the nights unforgettable. Night had fallen completely now, and the house was quiet in a way that made even the walls feel alive. Candles flickered softly in the corners of her room, casting long shadows that danced along the wallpaper. Outside, the chill of the evening pressed against the glass. But inside, the warmth of the hearth was not enough to chase away the thoughts crawling through her mind. She sat by her dressing table, her gloved hands resting on the polished wood. Her gown hung carefully on a hanger, its folds still holding the shape of the dance she had performed earlier. And as she stared at her reflection, she barely recognized herself anymore. The face staring back was composed, poised, perfect, exactly as society demanded. But inside, her heart was a storm. Every night she replayed the moments of the evening, the way he had looked at her across the ballroom, the soft tilt of his head, the faintest curve of his lips. Was it curiosity? Interest? Something deeper that she dared not name? She shook her head gently, trying to banish the thought, but the memory clung to her like a shadow. She knew she should think of nothing but propriety, but the truth was, her mind refused to obey. Every rule, every expectation, every careful smile. They pressed upon her chest during the day, but at night, she could let herself feel the things she had denied herself. Her thoughts wandered to impossible scenarios, moments that might never happen, questions that had no answers. What would it feel like to speak freely to someone she liked? Caution. To let her hair fall loose and feel the cool night air brush against her neck? Such thoughts were forbidden, yet they bloomed endlessly in the darkness. She remembered the first time she had felt this way. A glance across a tea gathering, a gentleman's polite inquiry, and a fleeting touch of his hand. Nothing scandalous, nothing overt, but enough to awaken something inside her that she had never felt before. Her chest had tightened, her fingers had trembled, and she had realized in that moment that her heart could betray her at any second. And yet, she could not stop imagining. She imagined conversations that would never occur, words that would never be spoken, moments that would never be shared. The world outside demanded silence, but inside her room, her emotions were free. They flowed like a river breaking through a dam, carving channels of longing, curiosity, and fear. Sometimes she would write in her private journal, careful to hide it from the watchful eyes of her mother and aunt. Every word measured, every thought coded, because even a hint of impropriety discovered could change everything. She wrote about her hopes in secret, her doubts, the fleeting joys of polite attention, and the sting of a glance not returned. The ink held her soul, yet she feared it too, for a misread line could become a rumor, and a rumor could shatter a reputation. In the quiet hours before midnight, she often allowed herself to dream. Dreams of laughter, dreams of walking hand in hand, dreams of nights not dictated by rules or eyes. Yet she always woke with a pang, the reminder that life was not a dream, and she was not free. Her freedom was measured in inches, her desires weighed against propriety. And still, she cherished these secret moments of self-reflection. They were her rebellion, her proof of life beyond the rules. She would close her eyes, listen to the faint sounds of the house settling, and imagine a world where she could speak freely, move freely, love freely. A world where she could choose whom to dance with, whom to trust, whom to speak to without a shadow following her every step. The candle flame flickered and threatened to die, yet she did not move to relight it immediately. They felt like allies. In the dark corners of the room, she could think more honestly. She could feel the pulse of her own heart without shame. She could acknowledge her longings without fear of judgment. Sometimes she whispered to herself, tiny confessions of emotion she could never say aloud. I wish he would notice me. I wonder if he thinks of me at all. I hope tonight's glance meant something more than I know. No one else would hear these words. No one could. And in that silence, she allowed herself to tremble with hope and quiver with fear in equal measure. She thought of the other girls in her social circle, those who had danced, laughed, spoken with men she secretly admired. Were their hearts racing like hers? Or had they learned to hide all feelings so well that nothing moved beneath the surface? She envied their composure, their courage, and yet, she knew some nights they also cried alone in their rooms, just as she did. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to watch her with compassion. It reminded her that the world could see only what she allowed. A gentle tilt of the chin, a careful curl of a smile, and everyone assumed perfection. No one knew the heart racing beneath the fabric. No one heard the quiet prayers and whispered dreams. She existed in layers, the face she showed the world, and the soul she hid from it. And then as the night deepened further, she felt a strange mixture of calm and urgency. Calm because no one could disturb her now. Urgency because the hours of reflection were slipping away. Soon the house would wake, the servants would stir, and life would resume its strict choreography. Her private world would collapse under the weight of daily expectation, and she would have to once again be polite, composed, and silent. But in these stolen hours, she was allowed to feel, allowed to imagine, allowed to be human. She traced her finger along the edge of her diary, not writing, not speaking, just touching the paper. It was enough to remind her that a life existed beyond rules, a life where hearts could beat freely, where thoughts could wander, where laughter could be genuine. Sometimes she thought of the ball, of the dances, of the fleeting glances that made her pulse race. She imagined those moments stretched into eternity, imagined a world where no one judged her every step, every breath, every thought. And she felt both joy and despair. Joy because her heart was alive, despair because the world would not let it speak. The night stretched on. Outside, The wind whispered through the trees. Inside, her room held every secret, every confession, every trembling hope. The candle flickered low, but she did not mind. She welcomed the shadows. They were the only friends who would never betray her. And in the quiet of that night, a single truth settled over her. Even in a world bound by rules, even under the constant watch of society, even when love and desire were forbidden, the heart remains defiant. It feels, dreams. It longs. And that is something no rule can take away. The night lingered, stretching long and quiet, as if it wanted to hold on to her secrets forever. She lay on her bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks with her eyes, imagining them as roads through which her thoughts could escape. Her mind wandered to the ballroom, to the faces, the glances, the moments that had seemed insignificant, but now haunted her with weight and meaning. A small sigh escaped her lips. It wasn't a sigh of exhaustion. It was something heavier, a sigh that carried the tension of all the rules she had to follow, the expectations that had been placed upon her since birth, the pressure of perfection that pressed against her chest. And yet, somewhere beneath all that, there was a flicker of rebellion, quiet and unspoken, a tiny spark that whispered, "Even if they never let me speak, I will feel." She thought about her governess, the stern woman who had guided her steps, corrected her posture, refined her manners, taught her the unspoken language of politeness. How much had she learned to please others? How much had she sacrificed of herself just to appear graceful, elegant, acceptable? And yet, she could not resent the lessons. They were survival. They were armor. They were the only way to exist in a world that demanded silence and perfection. Her thoughts drifted to the other girls she had known. Some had thrived under these rules, turning constraint into elegance, constraint into charm. Others had wilted quietly, their hearts stifled under the weight of propriety, their dreams folded neatly away, never to see light. She wondered which path she would take, which path she dared to take. And the answer was never clear. The candlelight flickered again, casting moving shadows that seemed almost like other people in the room. She imagined conversations she could never have, whispers of laughter shared freely, a smile given without calculation, a hand held for comfort instead of display. The fantasy was intoxicating, and yet painfully unreachable. She reached for her diary again, pen poised but trembling in her hand. The paper seemed to hum with possibility, but she hesitated. What if someone found it? What if a single word, a single line, betrayed her to the world outside? And yet, the risk was worth it, because she needed to let herself breathe, even if only in ink.
She began to write, slowly, deliberately, each word a release, a confession, a small rebellion.
She wrote of the dances, of the moments when her heart had leapt despite herself, of the glances exchanged in silence, of the small joys that belonged only to her. And as she wrote, the tension inside her began to ease. The world of rules, expectations, and judgment receded, and she could finally exist as herself, even if only in the quiet of her own mind. Hours passed, and the house remained still. She paused, laying down her pen, listening to the subtle creaks of the floorboards, the distant wind rattling the shutters. She imagined the lives of others in the house, the servants resting, her family sleeping, the world continuing without pause. And she felt both comfort and isolation, all at once. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to watch her again. There was a depth in those eyes that the world could never see, a soul full of thoughts, feelings, desires that existed only in secret. And for a moment, she allowed herself to smile, a real smile, one that didn't need to be measured or approved, one that didn't need to hide fear or longing. And in that smile, she found a tiny freedom, a freedom no rule could take away. She thought about the mornings to come, the breakfasts, the lessons, the walks, the polite greetings and rehearsed smiles. She knew the night's quiet rebellion would fade, buried under the demands of the day. But she also knew something else. The quiet rebellion had planted a seed of hope, of desire, of life lived fully even in constraint. And that seed was hers alone. Her thoughts wandered back to the ball, to the final dance, to the fleeting connections,
to the moments she could never claim in daylight. She wondered if the other girl in the room, the one who had smiled, blushed, and dared to hope, was the same as she, hidden beneath layers of silk and expectation. Perhaps every young lady carried the same secret, the same storm of longing beneath the polished exterior, the same whispered dreams in the quiet of the night. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of the evening settle. She imagined a life where rules were less strict, where hearts could speak, where gestures didn't need permission, where love could bloom in the light instead of the shadows. Though she knew such a life was far away, even impossible, the thought filled her chest with warmth. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to drift, to breathe, to simply be. No judgments, no rules, no expectations. Just her, and the quiet night, and the secret of her own heart. And in that stillness, she realized something profound. Even in a world where every word is measured, every glance observed, and every action judged, the human heart will always find a way to feel, to dream, to hope. It is in these quiet, secret spaces that life truly exists, that love truly grows, and that a young lady, bound by silken etiquette, can still be completely, defiantly herself.